Thank you very much, thank you very much to our host. He said he was a landlord today, so he had to make the introduction. So thank you very much for hosting us. And Minister, thank you very much for joining us today. I have now become quite used to this room, and all of you who always join us for this presentation. This is the official report that we are presenting today. It looks quite handsome, you know, the chateau is there, is very, very, very good. But as the Prime Minister said, well, I will only take it if it's got good news, you know. But, and mostly I have to say, when it comes to Slovakia, objectively, that it is a story of resilience in a sea of very turbulent waters. This is basically what this story is about. This is what the report is about. Resilience in a very, very difficult context. Slovakia has achieved an impressive transformation in just a few decades, managing the transition process to an independent country efficiently and, very importantly, also peacefully, implementing growth-friendly reforms and opening the country to foreign investment, entering the euro, developing a strong financial system. These days, developing a strong financial system, I repeat, developing a strong financial system, you know, it's one of those things you have to knock wood, knock wood that you can say this all the time for a long time. These achievements did not prevent the economy, of course, from falling into deep recessions in the first years of the crisis. We all did, unfortunately, especially in 2009. That was a very, very bad year for all of us. But they helped it to bounce back pretty fast. Today, Slovakia is growing. We believe at about 2.6% in 2012. I have to say the OECD average is 1.4. Europe is 0 or minus 0.2% in the euro area. So 2.6 compared to minus 0.2, I don't have to do the arithmetic for you. You take your own judgment. Now, however, we know that Slovakia is still facing important challenges. Public debt has been rising steadily since 2008. I have to say Slovakia here is in very good company because the average debt to GDP ratio in the OECD increased by more than 30% in this period. Unfortunately, the problem is that it is still rising very, very fast in many of the countries. This is a problem. We actually are delivering to the Minister something called Restoring Public Finances for all the OECD members. And I have to say this is a very, very difficult challenge that we're all facing. But when you start with a very low debt to GDP, like Slovakia, you can afford to have some expansionary period where the debt grows for a certain number of years through the crisis and still end up with a manageable debt to GDP ratio. In many countries in the OECD today, well, the average debt to GDP in the OECD is 100% today. Now, of course, you have some gold medals like Japan, you know, upwards of 200%, but that's a gold medal. You don't want to be in that podium, you know. You don't want to be in the podium. You want to be away from that as much as you can. Now, there's also a problem of unemployment, which has been increasing. Slovakia's unemployment rate is now the 5th highest in the OECD, and domestic demand remains weak. In the context of the euro crisis, the recovery outlook remains uncertain because growth relies strongly on external demand and investment. Now, this means you have to row faster, you know, you have to, because around you, being a small open economy, if the partners and the neighbors are not doing very well, they are flat or negative, then it requires a greater efforts. To overcome the current difficulties and lay the foundations for a better future, Slovakia needs to improve the production and its competitiveness, strengthen its domestic demand, make its economy more inclusive. So we are recommending 3 lines of action which are in the survey. First is the fiscal framework. Here we're talking about strengthening the medium-term spending framework introducing and implementing the planned spending ceilings. This is, by the way, this sounds very technical, spending ceiling, multi-year spending ceilings. But also if you put together that with the Financial Stability Board, the Financial
Fiscal
the Fiscal Council, as it's called elsewhere, I have to say this is a very great institutional, not only evolution, but revolution. And it is also a provider of confidence. It's not just a decision, a bureaucratic decision to create a certain unit. It is really a message to the market. It's a confidence message. It's a signal, It's like a language that you're saying, yes, I intend to be disciplined in the expenses and in the deficits, but in case I need to be reminded, I am creating an independent oversight body that will be checking that we stick to the program. So this is very, very important. Now, there's also a question of boosting the administration's capacity to monitor, to evaluate spending programs, and ensure the follow-up assessments. It's not just a question of how much you put into the machine, but what comes out of the machine. The recent creation of the Fiscal Responsibility Board, or as you call it, the Fiscal Council, because this is the way in which it's called around Europe and around, well, in the United States, they don't yet have one like that, but they have a number of institutions, is an important step in the right direction. During the budget preparation in particular, the FRB will determine whether the short and long-term sustainability criteria are being met and whether it's necessary to make budget adjustments. It will also evaluate the effects of structural reforms on budget sustainability. I was trying to remember, I think in the case of the United Kingdom, it's called the Office of Budgetary Responsibility or something like that. It's quite descriptive of the role that it should be playing. It's the OBR, which was created by the government itself, but it's completely independent from the government. However, the success will depend on the technical capabilities of this body, of this agency, which will be severely tested since the mandate is ambitious and it's moving into uncharted territory. It's beginning. To ensure its effectiveness, the FRB will need to build up to its reputation and its credibility with a continued support from the government and the opposition based on access to information, transparency, and first and foremost, medium and long-term projections of the sustainability of budgets. The effective collection of taxes remains another crucial element in improving the fiscal framework. In this respect, efforts to move towards an integrated tax collection system must continue, while the structure of taxation should be reformed by making it more friendly to growth, notably by increasing real estate and environmental taxes while we bring down the taxes on labor, for example, the so-called tax wedge on labor. But of course, if you're going to lower the taxes on some part, you need to compensate. And what we're saying is let's compensate on the part of consumption taxes, on property taxes, on green taxes, because they are not so distortive and they are more growth-friendly or less unfriendly than conventional income taxes. I also have to say that I'm very it's interesting when you are having a big discussion about the fact as whether you should introduce a 25% marginal tax on the wealthiest. We come from Paris, of course.
I see, I understood now.
No, I don't want to say anything more. Now, let me also say that, I was at a press conference with the Prime Minister a moment ago, and he's saying, well, there seems to be, he called it like a sport or something like that, to avoid the taxation. I don't think it's just a sport. A vogue, he said it's in vogue, it's a fashion. Is it not to pay the taxes? I have to say, in the present circumstances, it's not just a question, it's not only a bad fashion, it's in an unacceptable fashion. It's a terrible fashion. It's an unaffordable fashion. Because it's a moment when you have to make the most out of the revenues in the books, and you should not be surprised that if people are not paying their taxes, then governments are moving towards having higher nominal tax rates in order to see if they can collect more. But effectively, you're talking about the tax base. If you cannot widen the tax base, the only way is to widen the tax rates, not to increase the tax rates, which is not always the preferred option, but maybe the only option, because the tax base is not wide enough. So this is an important consideration. It's not only also about taxing better, it's also about the spending side, Minister. And, to succeed in fiscal consolidation without hurting growth, the decisions of policymakers are becoming increasingly important when it comes to the allocation of the funds. Okay, you have a tight budget, difficult budget, because you want to reduce the deficit, you bring down the debt, okay? So you have little room. Okay, within that little room, how do you best allocate the expenses? What makes the greater impact? And also because health is noble, important. Education, noble and important. Infrastructure, noble and important. Housing, noble and important. Water, noble and important. You know, every program is noble and important. How do you make the trade-off between the different programs and see what you are going to dedicate it to? What are the priorities? The efficiency of public institutions in implementing public spending is also crucial. So Slovakia is in a position where they could do more about this and testing the efficiency of the public sector. We've also offered to share with Slovakia the experience that we have. We're sharing with Slovakia the experience of other countries in this matter. Slovakia also can do better in terms of educational outcomes. We have significant spaces here to improve on educational outcomes. While the aggregate PISA score has improved since 2006, now it's been 2-3 year cycles, the OECD has identified a number of policy avenues aimed at raising Slovakia's educational outcomes and bringing them in line with other OECD countries. Structural measures should be aimed towards increasing the efficiency of the educational system, particularly by consolidating the networks of schools and increasing the average classroom size. Here you will say, well, Mr. Gurría, you know, this is if you want bigger classroom size, then maybe the attainment will not be so good. Well, no, because there's such a thing as, well, let's say, ideal classroom size, and you're in very good shape in terms of being there, and also because there's a trade-off. If you increase the classroom size, maybe there's a room for quality, maybe there's a greater room for other issues other than simply just having a very small classroom size and having a much greater number of teachers that are attending them, but necessarily, of course, this puts stress in the system. So there's always a trade-off here. Now, I have to say that, you know, I'm aware of the fact that there's a strike going on, or hopefully now this is going to be the end of the strike, and there's going to be, and there's always a question of the budgets and something which is shared by everybody, which is to have good pay for the teachers. This is fine. The question is, the limit is we want to have good pay for all the other civil servants. We want to have a good pay for the police. We have to have a good pay for the firemen. We want to have good pay for all the civil servants in all the ministries, etc. But of course, we always teachers always have this very special place in society because of the role that they play, and they connect the families, etc. So we understand what is going on, At the same time, we also understand that this is discussion, this negotiation is being done in a context of very tight public finances and relatively limited rooms of maneuver here. There is, however, a question of evaluation of the performance of teachers. I have to say, I come from Mexico, from a country where the teachers' union has 1.2 million members. They even have their own political party. They have candidates for president, candidate for governors, candidate for Congress, you know. They got 10 or 12 members of parliament in the last time around, I think. So they are politically very active, but of course, they don't like evaluation. They don't like evaluations. And so there's a tension there between the need to evaluate and or what I would call automatic kind of improvement over time simply because of seniority or whatever. The problem is evaluation is what makes for a functional, successful educational system. If you look at PISA and you look at the ones that are at the top, let's forget about Shanghai and forget about Macau or forget about Hong Kong. There's no reason why we should forget about them, by the way. But let's talk about countries that are more like Slovakia, okay? And the countries that are more like Slovakia, some of the Nordic countries and some, their evaluation of the teachers is 60 years old. You know? Now, the systems that have the better evaluation systems and the more strict evaluation systems is also the system where teachers have greater standing in society, precisely because the evaluation and the filtering of the quality is so great, so good, that of course they are perceived and they're very well accepted in society. So things, one thing comes with the other. Now, evaluation systems should be improved also because for schools, this is not just about students do the PISA test, and they are improving, but slowly still the performance is not quite up to speed. No. Teachers have to be evaluated. We have a system called TALIS where we evaluate teachers, not only the students. But the schools also have to be looked at, the functionality of the schools as a unit. There are such things as best practices for the schools. And then some support toward disadvantaged pupils, low-income families, for example. And then you have the Roma, the challenge of the Roma, which is not unique to Slovakia, but where perhaps the problem is more acute as a proportion of the whole system. Good quality early childhood education also has a very important impact on future educational outcomes, in particular for children in socioeconomically disadvantaged backgrounds. So we welcome the planned removal of premiums for 8-year grammar schools by 2013 and further encourage the development of existing incentives for integrated pupils with special needs in standard classes. Now, the other one is about the employment market. Slovakia's unemployment has increased by 4 percentage points since 2008. It's about 14% today. I have to say that the reason why it's 14% today is because you started at 10%. The increase is more or less the same or sometimes even less than everybody else. The average in the OECD is about 9%, 8 to 9%. The average in the euro area is 11.5% unemployment, but growing. We are considering that it is going to continue to grow beyond 12% next year and the year after. You're looking at a very tough year of 2013. It's going to be a very difficult year throughout. So, but the problem where you say 14% unemployment, yes, but youth unemployment is double. Now, youth unemployment is double everywhere. Unfortunately, sometimes it's triple or quadruple. Youth unemployment is the great tragedy today in practically every country in the world, but in the OECD certainly. Particular attention should be devoted to tackling inactivity and unemployment not only with the youth, the low-skilled, the Roma. Strong activation policies to minimize the increase in structural unemployment are therefore urgently needed. We are recommending that Slovakia increase its spending on active labor market policies, even with the tight budgets, as it remains one of the lowest in the OECD. This activation labor market policies. Targeting of activation labor market policies should be improved, and programs should be made more client-oriented. Now, also when you're talking about resources, the public employment services, here we had an explosion of growth. So public employment services was not a problem. Nobody had to say, why should you give more money to the public employment services? You know, nobody was going there. Now with the high unemployment, everybody's going to the public employment services, and we're finding them that they're not necessarily appropriate to the needs. So again, strengthening that is another question. So generally, Mr. Minister, the State Secretaries, please, being in the place where you are is a very great asset. You know, geographically, is great. I say that because also I say that about Mexico all the time. You know, just. But in Mexico, they say, poor Mexico, because it's so close to the United States and so far from God. No? It's a no. But Mr. Shimon Peres, once when I visited him in Israel, he said, I have to borrow that phrase, because here it would be poor Israel, so close to God and so far from the United States. It's exactly the opposite. But of course, the question is here, the question of competitiveness and the question of productivity is critical, because the way in which you use your geographic location is precisely by using the fact that you are in the middle of the markets, and therefore you have to make the best out of it, keep the investment, keep the productivity. I was telling the Prime Minister that we have just been with Mr. Rajoy, with Monsieur Hollande, with Madame Merkel, with Mr. Monti. All of them had one word: productivity or competitiveness. So normally this is the ministers were talking about these words. Now it's the political leaders who understand how important and how critical this is for the welfare of their countries going forward. So, you know, I would say please take into consideration that some opportunities are rising, some costs are rising in China, for example, and also the just-in-time geographic location is starting to be much more important. So clearly, there's a lot of advantage that Slovakia can take here, provided it continues to be competitive, provided it continues to be productive. So thank you for the opportunity, ladies and gentlemen. You have all the detail here. You can look at it. You can, if you have insomnia, you can take, you know, and then you will go to sleep very fast. No. It's quite an exciting report, actually. I find it keeps the attention, but certainly it is done with not to tell the Slovakians what to do with Slovakia. They know better. What we are trying to tell Slovaks is what the rest of the world is doing with these same challenges that you have on education, on competitiveness, on productivity, on the question of collecting taxes, on the whole question of growth, youth unemployment, etc. And by doing that, allowing you to compare yourselves, but also, of course, to use the best practices from others, that you can apply them for best use here in Slovakia. Thank you very much.